Can I steal you for a minute?
Steal you for a minute?
Can I steal you for a minute?
Welcome to Can I Steal You for a Minute, the reality dating recap podcast. My name is Indra Raj.
And I'm Mary Bianco.
And we have something special today. We're always changing it up on these weeks where we don't actually have a show to cover. But today, we were just so thrilled because someone reached out to us on Instagram. Our guest today, Zara Hanawalt, who is a freelance journalist, and she's written for Glamour, Marie Claire, Cosmopolitan, and more publications, and has written some really interesting articles about the Bachelor franchise, particularly when it comes to issues around diversity. Anyone who's been listening to our podcast knows that we're always thinking about that. And particularly after this shit show of an end of a season for Jen and moving forward for the franchise. So yes, welcome Zara to the podcast.
Hi, thanks for having me.
It's so great to have you. And thank you for listening to our podcast and finding us so we could chat.
Yeah.
So why don't you tell us a little bit about how you got into writing about this content and why you feel strongly about it?
Yeah. So I actually am a journalist who primarily covers motherhood and parenting and women's health. But originally, when I got into the space, I was really interested in women's lifestyle. So sort of anything that a women's magazine would cover, from entertainment to relationships to health, that whole kind of gamut. I sort of started specializing in the parenting content about 9 years ago, but I'm still really interested in covering culture. And I've always been especially interested in covering diversity and racial representation and gender representation in media. And I think reality TV is such an interesting lens to sort of view what's going on in the world through.
Yeah.
I wasn't really a reality TV viewer until pretty recently. I had never watched The Bachelor until about 5 years ago. And then I was a new mom and I just sort of needed a venue for escapism. And so I started with Hannah Brown's season and I was just kind of hooked from there. And I've watched every season since, and I've gone back and watched a few of the old ones. And it's kind of interesting to see how far the franchise thinks they've come.
Yeah.
Good emphasis
If you know what
there.
I mean.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, wow. Hannah Brown's season was your first season.
Mm-hmm.
What did you think of her, as someone just coming in? Did you just start with a season? Did you see her, pre-interview before the season started?
No, I really was not familiar with her at all when I started watching. I sort of became interested in trying to watch The Bachelor because I started listening to Becca Tilley's podcast.
Mhm.
And she would mention The Bachelor. She would have a few people from the show on. And so I was like, you know what? I've been hearing about this show for so long. I think it's time to give it a chance. So I went in completely blind regarding, who Hannah was and the role she had played on the season that she started on Colton's season. And I just kind of dove right in.
Oh my gosh. Well, jumping into one of the articles you wrote about, which I thought was just really well said, is just if we look at recent bachelorettes, since Hannah Brown, all the white women have kind of been afforded this, I'm messy. Look at me, I'm messy. I make all these mistakes, whatever. And by contrast, the women of color who have been bachelorette since then haven't really had that luxury, I think, to be messy. I think we can all imagine the backlash would be, there would be backlash, maybe not empowerment around being messy the way that we saw, Hannah Brown was a mess.
Yeah.
I love how I had forgotten about Katie Thurston's 12 days of messy.
That was
so embarrassing for all of us.
that whole season was just a mess. So, and she got a lot of permission to do a terrible job, and everyone was like, whatever.
Yeah.
Yeah. I
Claire,
have to say, I'm a Katie Thurston fan. And
Are
I think
you?
she has done a really good job of sort
Okay.
of pushing back on stuff.
Yeah.
I think she's one of those people who actually does want to see things change.
Yeah.
And she doesn't always get it right, you
Yeah.
know, but I think she's trying and I think she's doing more than a lot of other people. So
Yeah, and she just got engaged, right, to another
Mhm.
comedian, so she's left Bachelor Nation, so I feel like you can almost push back on it more from the outside than you can
Yeah.
when you're in it. Because we look at Tasha, conversely, who's still kind of in this whole wrapped up in everything, and she's in this controversy, in quotes, with Caitlin Bristow, and Caitlin, since she's known as being messy, can kinda, like, fly off, say whatever she wants on a podcast about it, and Tasha, I do think this is her style, but even more so, she has to be so calm about everything, and she has
Yes.
to be so
Yep.
calculated and poised about it,
Mhm.
and ironically, that's what people criticize her for as a bachelorette. So there's
Right.
really no winning if you're Tasha or Michelle or Rachel Lindsay or anybody.
Yeah. I was listening to your most recent episode today and how you mentioned that Tasha was sort of composed almost to a fault. And I
Yeah.
was really thinking back on that. I agree. I feel like she's someone who we didn't really get to like connect with in the same
Yeah.
way.
Right.
And I would say the same thing about Michelle and even I think to a certain extent Charity.
Mhm.
But I think
Yeah.
it's really just because of the amount of pressure that was on them and this sense that you had to just come and be perfect and be a role model and you had to carry the weight of representation on your shoulders. And I think we saw that with Jen too in a
Yeah.
different way. I mean, I think Jen had the kind of arc that Hannah Brown had, but I don't think it's going
Right.
to go down in history that way. And I don't think people are giving her the same sort of like girl boss
Yeah.
treatment as they gave Hannah.
That's
Yeah,
so
people are
true, like
calling her
and we've even
cringe.
said that, like,
Mhm.
the Luke comparisons in terms of just choosing, like, the most toxic man as your favorite person, and it's been really hard to watch, and, I just saw another thing about Devin. Apparently, like, I just saw this literally before we came on, Bachelor
Mhm.
Data just posted that he has a
Yeah.
restraining order because he broke into his ex-girlfriend's place and, like, had a year of probation. Like, these are things that, like, should have disqualified him from even being on the cast.
Yeah.
So I, like, don't know what the producers are doing, but, I mean, that's a whole other thing. I think, like, Jen has just been treated like I don't know, it's almost like she has no way, again, of winning in this situation. She's been I don't know, I was thinking about it before we got on here. I know I talk about this way too much, but reading your articles and just thinking about, like, whatever, but, like, especially because Maria came up so much during this
Ugh.
season, I'm like, if Maria had been the Bachelorette and had made similar mistakes, or even just been Maria, who's messy and kind of, like, all over the place and whatever, like, people would have loved her for it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's what they love her for, is
Mhm.
being a mess. And,
Mhm.
like, we have never seen a lead of color who's a woman have the opportunity to even be that way, and then
Mm.
they can never be the hero because people want a messy, powerful woman, but only if she's white.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, I don't know, it's, like, really crazy to just, like, think about that and realize how we really haven't come very far.
No.
No.
No, because it's like you put people up as the lead, but then you give them no resources to actually, and by resources, I mean just casting people who like them and casting people who were expecting Jen and are attracted to who Jen is, because we got glimpses of her on Joey's season and you could see that, she likes making these like corny cutie pie jokes, and like she just needed a guy who could like banter with her that way, and they didn't cast for her in so many different ways. And then now they just propped her up on a stage, made her watch her engagement, reminded her over and over again how much pressure it must have been to be the first Asian American representative. And then they were like, okay, bye. On to our 61-year-old white lady that's going to come out the stage. And like,
Exactly.
yeah.
Exactly. I mean, it just is so sad to me because when Jen was announced as Bachelorette, I think, as a South Asian, but an
Mhm.
Asian woman too, like my heart just sank because I was like, I know how this is going to go based on how you're setting her up. They announced that they're telling us who our next Bachelorette is, and then they call Daisy up to the stage.
Oh, God,
Oh,
I
And
know.
then Jen comes up and, then they go to Maria for a reaction. And immediately the audience is like, we didn't want her.
Exactly.
And the saddest part is she's on stage talking about how she never got to be the main character.
Right.
And we're
yeah.
not letting her be the main character. And we didn't at all throughout her entire season.
I know.
No.
Even like her men were so attention seeking
Mhm.
that they took the spotlight from her too. It's like the first 6 episodes weren't about Jen at all. It was about Devin and Sam fighting with each other. So
Yeah.
even like in her own season, she's not even getting like I remember an episode Bachelor Data put it up, I forget. She got less screen time than Sam and Devin. How is that possible? She's the lead of
Yeah.
the
I
show.
know. I
It's
know.
ridiculous.
I
Yeah.
know. I was really like it was in your article about Jen, like just talking about that. It was so the finale of Joey's season and when they announced the Bachelorette, it was so not about Jen, like at all. It
Yeah.
was like
Not at all.
this disappointing piece of information that we got at the end, and they framed it that way. Like they
Yeah.
could have really made it a better announcement, and I think they were still so like wanting to play off of this Maria and Daisy fever that was going on and just
Mhm.
it's sort of like boils down to like ratings, which like,
Yeah.
if you get really macro, it's like the capitalist machine, like what makes money, what do people want? And it's like if you don't help people, unfortunately, like want to be interested in a person of color who's going to be the lead of your show, they are not going to be interested. Like it's just kind of in so many of these spaces, it's like people think of people of color as like a DEI hire, but it's like
Mhm.
and that's kind of how Jen feels, honestly,
Yeah.
is like
Yeah.
she was like, "Oh, okay, well, we can't get these 2 people, so let's make our first East Asian, bachelorette. Let's not be thoughtful about it at all. Let's not, like,
Not
give
at
a
all.
crap about her. Let's not, like, make her feel comfortable or, like, even chosen for this role." And then you want, like, this to be a great season where people care, like,
Yeah.
unfortunately, that's not what happened.
No. And honestly, I think that we criticize the franchise a lot, rightfully,
Yeah.
but I think the audience is completely complicit in all this
Mhm.
Agreed.
because
Mhm.
Jen Tran was not the first surprising pick, right? It
Hannah
was not the
Brown.
first time Hannah Brown, right?
Yeah.
And people found a way. I mean, granted, I didn't watch the show when she was announced, but from my understanding, people found a way to get behind her very
Yeah.
quickly. Clayton, like, okay, he got a lot of hate, but he came out of nowhere and
Right.
we were okay with it. We were
Yeah.
able to see him as a leading man. I remember when Jen was announced, the entire internet was just like, what's going on? This is shocking. Is it shocking? I
No.
mean, I
No.
watched the first episode of Joey's season and I saw her walk out of the limo and I was like, that's one of the most beautiful women I've ever seen, first of all.
Yeah.
And like she has bachelorette energy to me.
Yeah.
Yeah, like,
So
perfect
yeah.
pick.
Even my dad, who like taps into the show very occasionally, he's like a 67-year-old white man. He saw Jen and he was like, "Oh, they have to pick her." He's like, "It has to be her. She laughs
Yeah.
like a bachelorette." I was like, "She does." Like,
Yes. I mean, I just like, I think what you're saying about, like, the audience being complicit is, like, a really important thing too, and I think, like, I have been part of the problem too at times, like, I think sometimes, like, without even thinking about it, we'll use words to describe our women of color who are leads, or be like, "Oh, I just thought this season was kind of boring."
Mhm.
Or, I don't know, it just didn't really grab me or whatever. And it's like
Yeah.
there is an element of the viewer, they're getting messaging from production that's like negative to begin with. But it's also
mhm.
like if you don't even try to be interested, you're not gonna be interested. And unfortunately, like Zara, you've probably felt this your whole life. I know I have. It's like stories about people of color, reality TV are just not held up as like
Mhm.
things that we should want to consume as much as white people's stories.
Yeah.
And there is an element of us as viewers, like, choosing to be interested. Like, I don't know
Yeah.
the right way to
Yeah.
say this, but,
Mhm.
like, we need to, like, get excited. We need to promote it ourselves. Like, we all have the power of social media now to, like, say, "Hey, this is something you should be paying attention to." And it's like, now people are paying attention to Jen because, like, everything was just so terrible. But
Yeah.
it's like,
Yeah.
is this what needs to happen? She needs to, like, have her be completely embarrassed on national TV for us to give a shit about her? Like, that's so wrong. It's so
I know.
wrong.
I think it's like on a much smaller scale because it's like goofy reality TV, whatever. It's like what a lot of creators I follow on social media talking specifically about like the Black Lives Matter movement and how it wasn't until we had like videos of suffering that people started to give a shit about telling these stories. And it's almost like you need it slapped in your face that something is going on to grab you.
Yeah.
And I think, like, with Jen, it's like we watched her suffering up there, and now people can, like, treat her as a human being and, like, feel for her and be, like, empathetic to how she reacted to certain situations, and then talk about how the show set her up for it. But it wasn't until we saw this, like, brutal event happen to her did people in the mainstream start to give a shit about the season at all and stop calling it boring and stop referring to it as like, oh, it's Jen. It's not anything about me. It's not anything about that. It's like Jen's not doing a good job. But then instead we can talk about
Yeah.
like all the things that didn't set her up to do a good job.
And it's the framing of the way people are talking about it. I saw a headline that said something about when Devin, released his 13
Oh
minute,
God.
oh God, his 13-minute Instagram video.
Mm.
I saw a headline that said like Devin responds to Maria Georges drama.
What?
Oh my
What?
God.
Yeah.
That is insulting.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
truly, like, you're not even gonna give Jen the headline? Like, this poor
Yeah.
woman. I mean, you can't say like, there it is. There it is. They chose the headline that they thought would get people's attention, and putting Jen's name in a headline didn't feel important to them because it wouldn't produce the number of clicks and ad revenue that they wanted. Like,
Yeah.
it just all comes back to, like, money and what we feel people want, and it's gross, honestly.
Yeah.
I'm so
Yeah.
curious, like, you've been writing, for a while, and, Mary mentioned, like, 2020 was a game changer in our country, I think, around discussions around race, but it's been several years since then, and, I'll speak personally as a person of color. It was, like, a huge time I felt in my personal kind of journey with being able to talk about these things, to be able to be more honest about how I really felt about growing up as a person of color in the States and around people that are primarily white and things like that. And it was really empowering and helpful to me. But I felt as the years go by, just less and less comfortable talking about that. And like there are fewer people who actually care. Like, again, it's like
Yeah.
we took 3 steps forward, and now it's like we're just taking all those steps back. You're paying attention to this as a journalist, obviously, and in pop culture and, women and motherhood and all these things. Like, what are you noticing in that vein?
Well, I will tell you that, as a freelancer, I'm always trying to pitch ideas and pitch stories. And I have a lot of, editors that I've worked with who will talk about how they want to highlight diverse voices and amplify women of color and their stories. Almost every single time I pitch a story that has to do with Asian or South Asian or Indian American identity, it is not paid attention to.
Yeah.
I have pitched stories about how, Jen Tran was announced as the Bachelorette. I've been pitching several people stories about how the aftermath of her season has unfolded, and I've gotten no responses. Whereas I pitched stories about Matt James' season, and there was a ton of interest around that.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah, I think for one thing, it's that people, I think in 2020, began to sit up and take notice, and then they kind of got tired of it, I think. And I think another thing is that we tend to assume, I think, that Asian people are protected by a layer of privilege. And I don't think people care about our stories in the same way. I think that, like you said, it's really, really hard to initiate these conversations if it's not being put out there. And I think that one thing I've been seeing a ton of in regards to Jen's season is my TikTok feeds are just completely full of Asian women who are talking about how they have felt second best to a white woman.
Right.
And it's, I feel like for me seeing that, I'm like, I relate to that so hard. And for so many years, I thought that was a me problem. I thought that was in my head. I thought that there was something that I was doing where I wasn't measuring up, even though I thought I was. And now it's like, no, we actually we live in this world where we're never really being seen as the main character. We're always kind of in this supporting role, always in this secondary role. And I think, you know, like when people talk about Maria and how confident she is, I think that's a type of confidence that comes from always fitting in your
Yep.
entire life, right? Like you
Yes.
don't gain that confidence in adulthood and carry it with you in the same way. And so I think that I just really wish people cared more about the intricacies of that experience, especially like being a child of immigrants. Nobody really seems to want to explore that much. Even, you know, we only see shows that are like created by Mindy Kaling that
Yep.
Right.
feature an Asian lead. In every other instance, you're the supporting character or you're like the sidekick or you're a guest appearance. So, yeah, I mean, I just think that this particular type of story, there just isn't really much of an interest in yet. And I don't know if that will come at some point or if that is just, I think, because in terms of representation, we are so far behind for so many reasons, right? Like,
Yeah.
Yeah.
many of them cultural, many of them like, you know, I don't know about you, but I could never have gone on a reality show because of all this cultural
We
pressure
talk
that,
about this.
yeah,
We talk about that all the time. All the
yeah,
time. Kind of interesting is like maybe I think why I love reality TV is like they engineer a lot of things in reality TV. We all know that. But there are certain things that just come through because they are real.
mhm,
And one of the very hard truths from Gen season is that women of color, particularly Asian women of color in this country, often feel second best to a white woman. And that happened in a very large scale with Jen, from beginning to end.
Yeah.
And I hope people hear that and understand that because that is like that really hurts a person. Like that
yeah,
really cuts you to your core. And I think I said this to you last time, Mary, that like I think a lot of women feel this like along different parts of identity. I don't think it has to be about race all the time, but being in a situation where you're feeling second best and especially when you're supposed to be the most desired person in the room. I
Yeah.
just, my heart just like truly goes out to Jen for that, like in so many ways. I also really liked the part of one of your pieces, I think it was after Matt James season, about how like people of color sometimes when we're watching these shows, we want to escape, but we can't because we're so worried about the cultural conversation going on or the cringy things that may be
yeah,
happening related to racial identity. And
Mhm.
like Jen's season is like case in point. Is
Yeah.
just
yeah,
like
yeah,
I don't feel like I could relax and enjoy the season because I was so wrapped up in wanting her to like be okay.
Yeah.
yeah,
As a woman of color, as the first East Asian bachelorette, and a lot of other things, but those two things especially. And I think it hits different for women of color who are watching it or people of color watching it because you've kind of been there and it's like, oh my God, I just want to see this person be treated like a
Yeah.
princess and like everyone's fawning over her and everyone's obsessed with her. And then, you have Sam M going on a radio show saying he hoped it was Maria or Daisy. And it's like, oh my God.
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah, it's not just Jen being deprived of this experience. It's all the people that they claimed Jen was going to get to inspire. That like
yeah,
Right.
all these little girls would get to watch TV and see someone that looks like Jen as an object of desire. And it's like as much as we should be like, oh, it shouldn't matter that you're getting romantic validation or not. We're all human beings. Like
yeah,
it's this is a dating show. It is
mhm,
important to feel that way and seem that way. And so there's entire communities of people who have been robbed of that experience because it's like the producers don't even know how much they're centering whiteness and
Right.
and cannot get out of their own way about it. Like
yeah,
it's not just mentioning another girl because it sucks that your fiance is mentioning another girl. He's mentioning Maria specifically. It matters that
Right.
it's Maria.
Right.
And like I think that they just don't think about that stuff, which is so crazy because the producers are all smart. So
yeah,
just take the next step, guys. Like really think about how this stuff looks.
And how did
yeah,
they like I don't actually know this, but I feel like they tried to at least hire some more producers of color, like
Yeah.
especially after 2020 and Matt James season, but I don't know, whenever I see pictures of producers, like they're all white.
Yeah.
So, I don't know.
They literally like 90% of them look like me. Like same
Right.
hair, same like whole vibe and aesthetic. I'm like, am I a producer on this show? Like
Totally, totally. Sorry, were you gonna say something, Zara?
Well, I think also, it's not just about hiring people. I think it's also listening to
Mhm.
people.
Yeah.
Like, I've been in so many professional settings where I've tried to make a comment or tried to push back on something because it doesn't feel inclusive. And it's been like, well, I don't think that's really going to be an issue. Or, there's just always a way that people just sort of will work around it and
Mhm.
just not listen. So I think that, there's probably some people of color in the rooms, but maybe they're not in those positions of power. Or maybe even if they are, they're still not being listened to.
Yeah. Sorry I have to bring this into politics, but I just can't ignore it. Because we have a South Asian woman running for president and Black, so like two different identities of color. I listened to Democracy Now! Every morning, which is like the leftist of the left national news coverage program. So this is
No.
where my point of reference is. I love Amy Goodman. She's amazing. And she's always pushing back, against the liberal candidate, or not against, but just like pushing them. And, this whole thing about Haitian immigrants eating animals and like whatever is going on in Springfield, Ohio, which is just truly like horrific, the rhetoric and what we're
Yeah.
hearing about this immigrant community. And, she asked her guest today, like, how did you feel about Kamala Harris's like response during the debate to these baseless, ridiculous claims that Trump was making about immigrant people as someone who comes from an immigrant family herself? Basically how she just ignored it. Like
Yeah.
she didn't bring up identity politics at all during the debate and has been very careful not to talk too much about that outside of some of the safe things like my mother came here from another country and worked hard and like things like that. But like there was a scenario where she could have said, like, it's deeply disrespectful for you to make these claims about an immigrant community and it's racist and xenophobic and all of these things. But it's almost like I guarantee you she's been trained to not talk about those things because the American public is not going to react well to them. I feel like there's like again, this is kind of going to that like 2020 moment we're into now. It's like we can't really it's like we're not allowed to really like actually get to the center of some of these things and how they are harmful to communities of color because people like just don't want to hear about it anymore.
Yeah.
So yeah. And I feel like that's just like reflected in Jen's season completely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. I mean, yeah, The Bachelor, every other reality show is a reflection, ultimately. I mean, there are some issues that are innate to the format, to the franchise, to the production, to all of it, but it's also just it's a reflection. It's magnifying these issues that are very real and that exist outside of our, reality TV world.
Absolutely.
Just looking forward, we have Grant season coming up, and we've appreciated that they are trying to do, it seems, intentional casting, that they announced Grant early, that they wanted to get girls in that were interested in Grant. There was this dumbass rumor floating around that Grant had been replaced
I
out
saw
of
that.
nowhere. And
Yeah.
everyone was citing to it, and Bachelor Data did a great job of being like, "Hey guys, quick lesson in media literacy. Like, if you click on the IMDb link and then you click on where they source to, it's like this random website that just has all those weird like healthcare ads that are like about like the spots everybody gets on their skin and like skin, all the grossest
Yeah.
things you can do." And people were just jumping so quick to believe that they were replacing Grant because there was something that popped up that made it impossible to work with him. And I'm
Hmm.
just like, I think, Zara, goes back to what you were saying. Like, the audience is complicit in this, where we're like already assuming the worst about Grant, and he's
Right.
Yeah.
been nothing but lovely on our screens.
Uh-huh.
And I feel like the Bachelor producers would be more careful in screening a contestant of color because their bias implicitly is going to be like, well, we got to check this guy out. Like, they're
Right.
not going to have that innate trust that they have in a lot of their white leads. And that stuff comes up later. And so I know Grant was background checked like a million different times. And yet we hear one whisper of something, and people like with big platforms are assuming that he's been kicked off the show.
Yeah.
So
They're so ready to believe it. Yeah.
So I'm just nervous. I'm
Yeah.
excited for his season, but I'm just nervous going forward that we're gonna have another lead of color who's left dangling and, like, does not
Yeah.
have as much support as they should have going through this.
Yeah, it's really interesting because I was just thinking about every lead of color that this show has had. I don't think there has ever been a time, maybe with the exception of Charity, that they have been announced as the lead in the
Mhm,
traditional way.
mhm.
You know, Grant, I know that people are saying that production wanted to get his name out early to make sure that the people who applied were actually willing to date a Black man, but
Yeah.
they just like dropped a news story. Like there was no
Yeah.
moment for him.
Yeah.
Tasha, brought in the middle of his season.
Right.
Michelle was announced alongside Katie.
Mhm.
Matt James, again, just a news story that dropped, which, okay, we were in a pandemic.
But
Maybe
still.
you can, yeah. But
Well,
it's
I mean,
just
he
even,
wasn't even from the show. That was the wildest
yeah.
thing about Matt. It was
Yeah.
like he was kind of a nobody.
Yeah.
But yeah, anyway, go on.
Which again, like he wasn't set up to succeed,
Right.
He wasn't comfortable on camera because he hadn't had that experience
Yeah.
as a contestant. And I think that really read on his season. Even like Rachel Lindsay, if you think back to that, she was announced as the Bachelorette before she was even eliminated
I
from the
know.
show.
Yeah, that was
I know, that
crazy.
was
So
so strange. Like, I don't know why that is. Like, I don't maybe it is not giving them their moment that, like,
yeah.
I love seeing, like, the bachelorette revenge dress, like they talk about, where it's like they come out at after the final rose and they get to have their piece with the bachelor and really tell him off and they look the hottest they've ever looked. Like, everyone deserves that moment
Yeah.
that starts you off on such a good foot. Like, thinking about the framing of the season, you have a moment there to really set yourself up how people are going to think about you in the months that lead up to your season coming out. And you get that powerful moment. And like you said, for Jen, it was kind of like, yeah, I just found out 30 minutes ago. Like,
Mhm.
I think I can share this, but I'll double check with my sister. A friend of my sister's is a production assistant in LA. And one of the odd jobs that she picked up last year was working on the women tell all or the after the final rose, wherever Jen was announced.
Yeah.
And so my sister's getting these texts, and it literally was gonna be Maria or Daisy, and then Jen was, like, rushed into a dressing room, like, very fast. So it
Yeah.
happened extremely fast, and that no one was expecting it. So I think it was a last-minute decision, she didn't get to be comfortable with it,
Mhm.
and then they threw her out there, and it kinda started awkward.
Yeah, and it was
Yeah.
so obvious. You
Yeah.
could really tell that that was what
Mhm.
was going on, and you could kind of feel through the screen that energy of like,
Yeah.
I'm not prepared for this. What am I doing? Like
Yeah.
not at all an awkward person, but she seemed awkward on that
Yes.
Yeah.
stage.
Yeah.
And yeah, and the audience, you could tell was just like taken aback and
Yeah.
not getting behind her. And yeah,
Yeah. I want Grant's season to go really, really well. And it is like that's such a good point. Like I didn't even notice that like yeah, he never had like an announcement moment and that's happened for so many people of color on this show. Like that is kind of wild to think about that. I mean, all I can hope is that like it worked that they announced him so early and they were able to get like a bunch of women who really like want to date him. I just like don't I've lost all faith in the franchise like around like the treatment of people of color on both sides. Like is he the first lead of color we've had since Matt James for The Bachelor?
For for men,
I
y
think so.
yes.
Yeah.
So
So
since Matt James, we've had Clayton and Zach. Like,
Yeah.
I know white men don't even have to be handsome or charismatic or be able to string together a sentence to be the lead of one of the most popular reality shows of all time. It's like, this is ridiculous. Like,
yeah.
I didn't even
Yeah.
watch Zach's season. I've watched every season of The Bachelor, like since Ben Flangic, and I skipped Zach because I was just so pissed. I was like, I'm not doing this. This guy's so annoying and so boring.
Yeah, he was terrible. Like him and Clayton just like and they were terrible. They treated the women terribly. They did not know what they were doing. Like I think the franchise was trying to lean into the messy thing like but for men. And it,
Mhm,
like
mhm.
Yeah.
didn't really work and I don't know. I think it's just so true. I think, just reading your articles and reflecting on this today, like the main message I think that I just see so much on these reality TV programs is like the inability for people of color who are leads to like really to not be super buttoned up on these shows because that's what they think America expects of them and whatever. And it's like, when I think about, at least for South Asian representation on TV, like the realest, messiest representation I've seen is like Never Have I Ever, which is fiction.
Yeah.
Like it's scripted, it was written that way. And so that I think allows the viewer to accept a little more. It's like if you really saw her, like Davy's character acting that way as the lead of The Bachelorette, like, nah, it would not be
Yeah.
okay.
No, it wouldn't.
She's also a child. So
Right.
it's not like you even get to see women that are
Yes,
grown
that's
up
so
and like
true.
Kelly Kapoor is like revolutionary in the way that she gets to be a ditz. And like I feel like that shouldn't be revolutionary, but it kind of is, where it's like this
Mhm.
whole other representation of like, I don't have to be this perfect like model person that you expect to look up to that has everything going on. Like I can be kind of like fucking around the office and a little bit dumb and like but she's not a main character in the show, and
Right.
it's very few adult roles that are offered that way.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's also such a lens for us to view how uncomfortable we are with interracial relationships.
Yeah.
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 Even on Joey's season, which was so well received, when he picked Rachel to go to
Oh, yeah.
hometowns, people were like, I just don't see their connection. It's like,
I know.
okay, well, like clearly he sees a connection between
Yeah.
them because
Also,
she's in
like,
his top four.
did they
So,
have eyes? Like,
Yeah.
yeah.
Mary and I couldn't stop talking about
I
how
know.
like sexually into each other they were. Like they had
Yeah.
Yeah.
such good chemistry. It's like even if you don't see it, it's like you're being racist.
Yeah.
Like that's really
You're
what
being
it is.
obtuse on purpose. Like, come on. Yeah. I
Yeah,
think
and it's always just like, "Oh, I don't know what it is, but I can't put my finger on it."
Right.
we can.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, it's like, there are these little coded things and we talk about them all the time. Like and I'm not going to say I'm perfect around this stuff either. I know I've said things on this podcast and
Me
other
too. Yeah.
places where I just feel like if I went back and listened to it, I might be like, "Oh, maybe I should have thought more about that," or like, "What was I really saying?" And like, what does that mean? And I think and I want to say that because I think we have to give each other permission to like make mistakes in this arena and
Mhm.
not get everything right. And remember that even though I'm a person of color and I want to pretend like I treat all other people of color perfectly, like I don't. I grew up in like predominantly white spaces and that affects like how I show up in the world as well, even if I look a
Mhm.
different way. So
Mhm.
it's a very complex issue. I want to make sure that we're still talking about it enough in 2024 and beyond
Yeah.
because it was so exciting to have a big moment where everyone was talking about it and people were really thinking about it for themselves and their families and their communities in a critical way. And I feel like we've lost some of that and I want to get that back. And I think these shows can really help us with that, but not if they're going to treat people the way they treated Jen.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think we can't be afraid to like make a mistake in talking about it. Like for
Yeah,
myself as a white woman, I feel like for a long time I was like, well, I don't want to say the wrong thing, so I'm not really going to say anything. And it's kind of like as long as I don't go out of my way to be an asshole and like never learn from things that I said that I'm now like cringing back on, like I think that that's an important thing here too, because people, I think the producers are afraid to make a mistake too, that they just don't even try. And then you do, I sound like my mom right now. Where I'm like, the worst thing you can do is not try. Like you have to just like put yourself out there and try to keep having the conversation, because if you just drop it, we end up with like a very complacent audience and shitty TV over and over again, because
Mhm.
this show is at its best when it shows us like people's different stories. I'm so tired of seeing like evangelicals find love and chastely kiss outside. Like come on. Like
right, right.
it's 2024. Like let's really
Yeah.
round this whole thing out and keep it dynamic and fun.
Totally. What are you looking forward to or worried about with Joan's Golden Bachelorette season? Are you going to watch it?
I am gonna watch it. I will also say this is like so cringe of me, but I sent Joan a link to something that I had written about the Golden Bachelor season, and she was so, so sweet.
Oh,
She sent me this like very sweet reply and stuff.
oh
So
my gosh.
yeah, I think she seems like a really lovely person.
Yeah.
So I'm excited. I was thinking it was going to be Leslie, and I was really excited because I felt like she really she was multifaceted in this really cool way on Golden Bachelor.
Mhm.
But I think with Joan, we just didn't get to see enough of her.
Yeah.
Which, again, Joan is lovely, but she wasn't on that show for very long. And
Right.
nobody was like up in arms when she was cast.
That's a good
So,
point.
Yeah, that's a
yeah.
really good point.
I think we're happy it's Joan because Leslie hates us.
Yeah, Leslie
Oh,
actually
really? Oh, no.
We basically said that she made Kelsey doubt her connection with Joey, and we called her Eeyore a lot, and she didn't like it. She got mad at us for spelling her name wrong. So we're a little relieved that it's Joan because Leslie is not a fan of Can I Steal You for a Minute?
Yeah. Let's just say, I don't know. We make memes, whatever, on our social media. Leslie could not take a joke.
No.
It was real, in a way that was okay, if she's the Bachelorette, this could actually, I don't know what would happen.
Yeah, I think Joan can roll with the punches. From what I've seen in her promos and the videos, I think she doesn't have this weight about who she is. She doesn't
Yeah.
think she's too cool for it, and she's just gonna I hope she's engaged. I hope she finds
Me
the
too.
silver fox and they just ride off in the sunset together.
I mean, I'm
I think the
realizing.
fashion is going to be good too.
Oh, yes.
Definitely. Definitely.
I'm
She's
realizing,
got great arms.
on Wednesday, I just hope they I know nothing about her. I know nothing about her. All I know is that she left because her daughter had a baby
Mhm.
and she needed her and she went to be with her daughter. And I was like, okay, that's one thing
Yeah.
that I know about
Yeah.
you now. And they really have not introduced a lot about her yet. So I'm assuming that the premiere on Wednesday is going to be very heavy on that. And this will come out the day after the premiere. So sorry, we're talking about it like it's in the past, but
Yeah.
right now it's in the future as we record this.
Yeah.
Just talking about the diversity aspect of it. I've seen a little bit of videos of the men who's going to be on it. And we were maybe going to talk about the men today, but I'm just worried, that there's going
Yeah.
to be a couple men of color who are strung along and then they get dismissed, close to the end, but not too close. And I hope I'm surprised. I don't know.
Yeah.
I think that I had this professor in graduate school she's the most brilliant woman I think I've ever met. And she gave this talk about how she's her whole thing is about democracy and talking about democracy and the Constitution and all sorts of things. But she was I really think the true way forward for race and equity in this country when it comes to diversity is more romantic relationships between different races.
Mhm.
And it was a really interesting concept. And I was I think it has a lot of power to it. And I think as seeing stories where there is a really strong interracial union of whatever kind, it can reframe, I think, how we view it going forward forever. And have we ever, Tasha and Zach got engaged. They're no longer together.
Rachel and Matt.
Rachel and Matt are together. I stan Rachel and Matt. I love them.
You too.
Love them.
But is that it?
I mean, Rachel and Brian are no longer together.
Right. They were together. Okay.
Might be it.
There's been
Yeah,
some
that-
paradise couples like Serena and Joe.
Mari
Which-
and Kenny. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, Serena and Joe to me Serena is hosting the podcast for this franchise, and she has never had the opportunity to talk about being half Indian.
Nope.
She has never, ever said anything about it.
Yeah.
Nope.
And, I wonder how much of that is her and how much of it is just how they framed her storyline.
I think it's a little bit of both because it's interesting. The most Indianness I've seen out of her is she wore, for one of her bridal outfits, it was a lenka. It was a white lenka. And I was okay, she's actually going to have a little bit of Indian representation at her wedding, but I've never heard her talk about it. Granted, I don't listen to that podcast, but like that part of her identity. I'm like, we have a real South Asian in this franchise who like
Yeah.
has a powerful position, and like she's just not talking about it really at all.
Yeah, I think she's to keep your position, you almost have to, like, mute it because
Right.
Rachel Lindsay, this was partially her choice to leave, but I think also the pressure that she felt originally hosting that show was when Garrett was engaged to Becca Kufrin, who was her co-host at the time, was caught liking extremely racist tweets and wrote this whole Instagram about, like, in defense of the police in the year
Yeah.
2020. And Rachel was like so hesitant to bring it up, and she's like trembling on the podcast, begging her friend to be considerate of who she's engaged to. And then she left the show because she didn't
Mhm.
feel like the response from anyone producing that show or anyone in ABC was on her side. And that's like a huge loss to the whole franchise because Rachel Lindsay is like so smart and
Yeah.
so good at hosting and so dynamic, like and could have been such a good resource for all of these, in particular, bachelorettes of color going through this process. And she's kind of had to help them from behind the scenes instead of being overtly on the
Yeah.
show with them. And then, like, for me, Grocery Store Joe liked Garrett's post about the thin blue
Yeah.
line. And I can't shake the fact that he's married to Serena. And either they had some huge conversations or she doesn't care. And
Yeah.
that would be a big
Mhm.
bummer.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Really.
and I think, like, Rachel and Matt, I mean, clearly she's grown. Clearly
Mm-hmm.
she has
Clearly.
changed. Clearly they have found a way to make it work. And I
Yeah,
hope that with Joe and Serena, it's a similar issue.
that's a good
But
point. I hope
she
so.
just,
Yeah.
yeah, she just has never really been given the space to talk about it. And I'm sure that if she ever did, the audience would be like, oh, she's making everything about race.
I know.
So,
I
Exactly.
know.
Right. Like, and that's what I was saying about Kamala Harris. It's like there's no winning when you bring up your identity along those
yeah,
lines anymore. Like,
Yeah,
yeah.
especially against a guy who's gonna weaponize it. Like, and
exactly.
anything you say to Trump in that moment where he knows he's lying about immigrants eating cats and dogs, he knows he's telling a lie, but he just gets to say whatever the fuck he wants. And Kamala has to tread very carefully all the time, and she's getting fact checked all the time. And it's like,
Mhm.
why?
Yes.
I could go for I can't even.
I know that you write about, women's empowerment and so I have to ask, are you watching The Secret Lives of Mormon Wives?
I am, I think, four episodes in right
Same.
now.
I've only
Whew,
seen 4
Yeah.
episodes.
I finished it. It is a
Bonkers.
journey in not being empowered. Let me just say that.
Yes,
It is.
I was watching last night while my husband was watching the Bears game, and I had no idea that Whitney was the woman who posted the RSV TikTok.
Yep.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah,
That TikTok still blows my mind.
I
Like,
know.
a lot about Whitney blows my mind. I mean,
Yeah.
having a husband who's been on Grindr and Tinder your entire marriage, and yet your friends talking about being a swinger is like the worst thing that's ever happened to you. It's like,
Mhm.
let's have a little bit of awareness about what's going on in our own home, babe. Like, come on.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, just all these like the subject of like, yeah, women's empowerment and like how this mom talk thing is supposed to be empowerment. It's just so like wild. The whole thing is just the rules and the beliefs that are come behind those rules and the morals and all of that. It's such a broken system.
Yeah.
And it's truly like a misogynist system that they're all still very much a part of, and it's just very interesting seeing it. And it's also very interesting to observe that there's only one woman of color in all this entire cast.
Well, there's
Truthfully, I was
two.
surprised that there was even
Me too.
one. Yeah.
Yeah, I think Jen also is. So Jen and Layla. So there's two, not any like great. But then here's
Oh yes,
Jen.
Jen is. Yeah.
I don't want to speak too much about Jen because I think there's stuff that comes out later that I don't really want to spoil, but like she is like trapped in her marriage. I think that is
Yes.
a pretty obvious theme throughout. And I think that for me, I couldn't ignore the dynamics of race in that relationship, where she even talks about like, well, my mom's the cleaning lady at the hospital where his dad's the surgeon, and she feels like she's constantly like bowing down to this group of like blonde translucent people, and she's just kind of like can't find her footing within this family that she's been part of for a few years, and gets to a really bad point by the end of the season. So yeah.
Yes, you can see that already. Like,
Yeah.
it's really kind of scary. I was saying to Patrick that Jen's husband looks like Aegon Targaryen
Yes.
from House of the Dragon.
And I think we've talked about this before on here, Andrew. That is my least favorite texture of hair on a blonde
Yeah.
man, where it's just like looks like it hurts your fingers to touch. So it doesn't help that he has that either. Like specifically, this hair pisses me off. I think he dyes it and it's just fried and dead now.
I also saw something today. I don't know if you guys saw anything about this, that like he's not actually Ben Affleck's second cousin.
Yeah,
Like,
I heard that they're not related.
they're
Yeah.
not actually related at all. And it's just like
Interesting.
this, which is like the least important thing about him. But it is like when you see the name Affleck, like I've never seen Affleck ever before. It's like,
Yeah.
okay, what's
Hmm.
going on here? But
Yeah.
yeah, it's an interesting. I think actually like bringing it just back to our whole conversation though, like this is the show that everyone's watching right now. Like it's a huge hit. Like people are obsessed with it, and I can't ignore the fact that it centers around a group of predominantly white women. Christian, well, they're not
Mhm.
Christian, but
I don't know what to call them.
yeah, like I mean, yeah. So anyway, white women.
Yeah.
And it's like a very, I think that just says a lot in and of itself. Like the ratings for the
Yeah.
show about this is like what's catching people's attention.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Um,
I couldn't stop watching it, so I don't even know what episode you guys are on compared to where it ends up because it all blurs together. Like
yeah.
it just is there's like my sisters and I got those crazy sodas. They have a place in New York City that opened up and we got like this like my sisters had one that was like Diet Coke and lime and coconut and creamer. And then I had one that was like pumpkin pie
Oh
and
my God.
marshmallow. It was
Was it
wild.
disgusting?
No, it was delicious,
Uh,
unfortunately.
They do look really good, I
It
have to
was
say.
very
Yeah.
refreshing, like perfect amount of ice.
of course.
So they got that right. I'll give that to them.
Well, apparently, like soda wasn't allowed even, but then like the LDS invested in Pepsi and they're like, okay, it's fine. And then there was like
Not surprised.
the episode I just saw, if Zara, I don't know if you're in the same one, like they were talking about getting ketamine treatments.
Yeah.
And I'm like, wait, but you can't drink caffeine and you
No.
can't drink
Yeah.
alcohol. You
No.
have ketamine
I've never done
treatment? Like,
ketamine. Like, what are we talking about?
And the laughing gas with the Botox.
Yes.
right.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's just like it does make me like feel for the women in these situations because you know there is an aspect of like truly not being able to get out of it in a way and sort of doing the best that you can, but it's just like it feels so like out there just
Yeah.
watching it.
Yeah. It's another world.
It is another world. Zara, is there anything else happening in pop culture right now that's kind of like you're interested in or that you've been thinking about in particular?
Not really. I know I've been hearing a lot about The Perfect Couple, which, like you said, it's just really interesting. What really takes off in pop culture and
Yeah.
what doesn't. So I'm excited to watch that, but I haven't yet. And then I'm excited to watch Tell Me Lies season 2.
Steamy.
Okay, I just started watching this show. It's become my like when I run on the treadmill show. So I'm only in season 1, but I'm like kind of obsessed with it.
Yeah, they're all bad people. Like
Yeah.
and everybody in it is bad people and everybody treats each other in a way that you've never treated another human being in your entire life, but
Yeah.
can't stop watching.
Also, like it's giving Devin and Jen a little bit at times.
Yes. Yes.
Just
Yeah.
like this like manipulative man just like
Yeah.
coming in and ruining your entire life for sport. Like it gets fucked up, but it's addictive. And I love like I was in college a little bit after this era, but it feel the clothing and the music feels very similar to
Yeah.
when I was in school. So it's very nostalgic.
Yeah,
Yeah. It reminds me. Sorry, go ahead.
No, I was just gonna say they've done a good job with that. It was right after I graduated from college. So like
Yeah.
when this is all happening. So it just feels, and I went to like a small liberal arts school. So it feels very like in the same vein. But go ahead, Zara.
Yeah.
What were you going to say?
I was going to say it reminds me almost of a show like One Tree Hill or The OC, where the
Yeah.
music was such a big part of the
Yes.
storytelling.
Yeah, and I miss that where it's like the
Yeah.
soundtrack is so distinctive and like if you look at Netflix, or I guess it was Netflix, the way they categorize certain shows like Friday Night Lights, they'll say powerful soundtrack. And it's like, yeah,
Oh,
let's bring back when the soundtrack, like every single moment mattered and every song was like such an intentional choice. It was so good.
yeah.
Totally.
Yeah.
I just rewatched One Tree Hill like as my background show, and that show is bonkers. Like off, like even more bonkers than I remember it. Like, and I miss when they just went for it with TV. Like,
I
Yes.
know.
really throw it at the wall.
Yeah. Do you listen to the Rewatch podcast at all?
I catch them on TikTok sometimes, but then I get sad that they're fighting again. So I have to push that out of my
Oh.
brain because I love the friendship between the three of them.
I know.
I know.
I know. I haven't listened to it either, but I'm kind of curious about it.
Yeah. And I love Sophia Bush's voice. She could read the phone book and I would just be wrapped up in it.
I know.
I appreciate that Tell Me Lies has a diverse cast. I feel like,
Yeah.
More so than some of these other shows. And that it's like, it's a popular show and all of that. Like, that feels important to me. And but again, it's scripted, it's fiction, like
Yeah.
reality TV, reality dating shows, I think, have some catching up to do in some ways. Like, sometimes some shows do it better than others. I think Love Island does it better than others.
US,
Love
UK
is
shit the
Blind
bed
is
this year,
pretty
but
good
UK.
about it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's
I mean,
always
Love is
interesting to see how race plays out on Love is Blind. Like,
yeah,
really
and Love is
interesting.
Blind has way more interracial couples, and I think in part because they get to know them as
Right.
talking about it rather than making all these assumptions about people's race and what they look like, and get to talk
Mhm.
about how race actually impacts them and how they navigate the world with that.
Totally.
And those are like the successful marriages that come out of that. It is
Yeah.
kind of interesting to see.
Yeah, really interesting. Well, Zara, thank you so much for
Thank you so
joining us on
much.
the podcast and
Thank
letting
you
us
guys
talk
for
your
having
ear off
me.
and hear what you had to say. How can people keep up with you and your writing?
I guess the easiest way would just be to follow me on Instagram. It's first name, last name, so Zara Hanawalt. That's kind of it.
Great. Wonderful. Well, thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
Mary and I are going to be back after this week's episode. We're moving to Mondays because Joan's episodes are on Wednesdays. And we'll probably talk about Dancing with the Stars too, because we got
I can't wait for tomorrow.
Jen,
I know, I'm
Joey.
excited.
Yeah, it's going to be fun. Okay. Well, thank you all for
So fun.
listening. And until next time, cheers, lovebirds.
Thank you. Cheers, lovebirds. Bye.
Thanks for listening to Can I Steal You for a Minute? Subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts, and if you like the show, please leave a rating and review. Follow us on social media at Can I Steal You for a Minute Pod, and support the show through Patreon at patreon.com/Can I Steal You for a Minute.